Here we go, Troy, Malcolm, and Adrian Bo on the Troy, Malcolm, and Adrian Bo podcast, episode 150. Troy, I actually did some throwback Thursdays, and we started the podcast in like 2017, 2018. So we're up to like 5-6 years, which is incredible. How are you going today, my good friend?
Mate, it's unbelievable. And think about, where the journey started with the podcast. We were just chatting one day and I was obviously involved in Million Dollar Agent and still involved with that podcast today. But you said there's actually a deeper story that we're missing in the podcast. And so we kind of threw a couple of ideas together and decided to interview a couple of key agents that we knew back then, both within the brand that we were working for, being McGrath, and then also people that we knew within the industry. And it's just evolved from then. AB, jokingly before we came on, we were laughing, saying that we're both really busy. Your coaching business has a huge amount of traction in a lot of markets right now. My current role within the business at McGrath Estate Agents is really busy and challenging, which is fantastic because the market conditions, the caliber of agents and the high performance culture that this business provides actually makes you lift your standards. So we were joking, saying that this podcast is actually a really nice moment in time to look forward to each week because we get that chance to sit back, chat as friends, but also share with our listeners some of the lessons and the learnings that we've found over the past 5 or 6 years that we know can have a huge impact on our listeners' business to help them grow a really successful business as a whole. But to hit 150 as an episode, I think that's pretty good. That's a good achievement. But to be honest, AB, I know you've got the same mindset as I do. We're only just beginning. So this is kind of really exciting to see how far we can take this. We love the feedback we get. We love the readers or the listeners and continue to grow every single week. And, we're evolving it. So keep sending those questions in because this is really something that we enjoy doing. Our currency is getting feedback. Our currency is seeing those reviews and ratings online and the questions come in. So if we can help your career grow at any point in time, please just reach out because that's what we're here to do. We'd probably do it anyway, Adrian, to be honest. We'd probably just record it.
even if no one listens, right?
Even if we had one listener, that's one person that we can improve. And maybe it is just one person listening to it thousands and thousands of times. Who
downloads. Yeah. No, it's so true, Troy, because all you and I do every day, Monday to Friday, sit in meetings, mentoring people, listening, role playing, strategizing. Then on Saturdays, we're calling auctions. So like the 15 minutes per week, we can just connect, add value, tell anecdotes, listen to some lessons and share those and pay it forward. So it is a very, altruistic, I suppose, experience to go through. But what I'm really happy with, you didn't notice, was the last episode we did was 147. So I've had podcast promiscuity and infidelity at 148 and 149 with 2 interviews, one with Gavin Lewis and one with Paul Davies. So I'm sorry that I cheated on you, Troy.
That's all right. I did notice that. I thought we've jumped a couple of numbers there, but I was going to run with it. And I also see that you had already sent those episodes live. But, like all good business partners, we just, let that stuff slide and just get on with the good stuff and stay focused on the prize. And that's getting to episode number 200. That's our next goal. So that's Adrian, today we promised our listeners last week, we promised that we were going to talk about, we're going to continue the conversation with auctions. Really important moment in time right now, making sure the auction expectations are set, expectations are reset. You're really getting face-to-face with your clients and providing them objective feedback that helps them make the right decision, both buyers and sellers. I think it's really important, both sides of the coin, that we really look after and we trust the process. The reality is our top performing agents, both within the business I work for, but across the industry, they are seeing huge amounts of success by following a process and constantly staying on the front foot in regards to setting those expectations. Now, Adrian, the conversation today is going to be about auction day, and auction day in particular, the use of the vendor bid, because we know that this point is quite contentious and it shouldn't be. You and I have no fear around the vendor bid, but I speak to a lot of agents, we coach a lot of agents, and we hear a lot of feedback to say, no, we don't use the vendor bid, or the vendor bid's used at the wrong time, or the vendor bid is used at a point where it actually takes away all momentum in the auction. So if we can today, I just want to unpack how we use that the best times to use it? And also, in your experience over the past 35 years and my 20-year experience, where have we seen the very best use it in the best possible way to get a great outcome for both buyer and seller? Because it actually, again, works for both sides of the equation.
100%, Troy. And what I always default back to is the communication process with your vendor and your buyers. So there's no use just talking about a vendor bid on auction day and not communicating that with your vendor, either at your set to sell meeting, your weekly update meetings, and or your reserve meeting, and then not talking about it with your buyers prior to the auction. We can't make the erroneous assumption that buyers are aware of agent rhetoric, if you like, or agent jargon, which is, vendor bid, on the market, pass it in, and also sellers. I mean, some sellers that we represent, Troy, as you know, have either never sold or sold decades ago. So, the vernacular, it's probably more vernacular, industry vernacular than it is jargon. That doesn't come first nature to them. And certainly as buyers, again, it's either been some years ago or never. So we've really got to make sure that the communication is not in a patronising sense to sort of spell it out, sort of almost in a childlike manner, but certainly remind the client. And even if they're an experienced client, what I like to do, Troy, in my reserve meetings is respect and acknowledge. So I'll say, Troy, look, I know that you've bought and sold real estate previously. Do you mind if I run through the most basic of terminologies that are likely to be used on the day? 1 is reserve price, 2 is on the market, 3 is vendor bid, 4 is passing it in. Is that okay? Oh, yeah, I appreciate that, Adrian. That's great. So that's not patronising. It's just being really transparent. So I think that, along with your final call with the buyers, or in our case, Troy, what you and I've been advocating, coaching a lot, is your final face-to-face meeting with buyers, because let's face it, most registrations are single digits these days, okay? So if we're not appreciating that buyers are making up 50% of a transaction, and if we're not treating buyers with the same level of gravitas, communication, respect, and importance that we are sellers, there's a problem. So a face-to-face meeting, I think, is critical. So that's my first point when it comes to this terminology on the vendor bid, plus many others, is over-communicate it with the seller and all buyers leading into the auction day.
I also think, Adrian, that we can't take anything for granted. A lot of the time we take the dialogue, the language, the vernacular, and we're quite complacent with our approach, and we throw these terms around. Actually stepping back and asking the questions, do you understand why we do this process? Do we understand why we cover that off? I think is really important right now. While the market's buoyant, and we have seen over the past 3 years, we've seen that buoyancy continue along, and you'd have multiple registrations, sometimes double digits, like you mentioned earlier. We're now down to, I don't know about you, Adrian, but most of my auctions now have 2, 3, 4 registrations. I think that was the maximum I saw on the weekend for regos. Translating to about 50% of those translating to bid. So a lot of circumstances, you've kind of got 2 people fighting it out. And buyer reluctance, I think, is very much on the top of their mind right now. When they're out there in the field, if they don't feel like the other buyers are confidently bidding, most other buyers are starting to pull back and be conservative in their approach, which is kind of a bit crazy, because you'd think when someone's conservative and you want the property, you'd go hard. But that's the market we're in. That's what we see out there right now in Sydney metropolitan markets, especially in the the Lower North Shore and the inner west and the outer western suburbs, where we're predominantly seeing a lot of auctions happen. Interesting stat, Adrian, is that 72% was the clearance rate for Sydney Metro on the weekend. So the great news is that if you had said 72% over the course of your 35-year career, 35-plus year career, 72% clearance rate, you're actually like, that's a great rate. That's a great rate. So you kind of think that, we're not in a difficult circumstance. We're just at a low stock level. So we've got to make sure that this process is followed really well. The auction itself, when you're doing the reserve meeting, are you recommending where to place the vendor bid? Are you waiting to the day before you recommend that placement of the vendor bid to the owner, once you know how many regos are there?
Yeah, it's a great question, Troy. And there's it's not a coincidence, or it's not an unstrategic plan that most reserve forms have a provision for where to place the vendor bid. So that is a nice reminder to have the conversation with the client. And I know a lot of agents, Troy, get lazy. And I know a lot of them, when they're having the reserve meeting, just keep that blank or write in at agent's discretion or at auctioneer's discretion. I don't know about that. That sounds a bit arbitrary and a bit loose to me. I would rather walk into the auction knowing exactly how many registered parties they are, how long to wait, if at all, that I do exercise the vendor bid, and at what level. Because, I mean, it's a bit easier for me because I act as the agent and the auctioneer, but if I'm calling it for someone else, like, I need to know this information. What's the alternative? We pause and have a conversation with the vendor and the agent, and then the owner is then surprised that the vendor bid is at that level, and then you get them offside. So it can be a little bit loose in that regard, I think, Troy. So yeah, I think your reserve meeting should have the reserve. It should even have a second reserve, meaning that if we do need to announce it on the market earlier, where's that going to be? It should have where to exercise the vendor bid, at what point to exercise it. Do we do it to start with if no one starts? Do we reject a bid under a certain price? That's great to know, as you're aware, Troy, as an auctioneer. That's outstanding to know. Otherwise, what's the alternative? We pause, look at the agent, and then wait for the nod. I mean, we're really on show here. We really need to make sure that the community is observing us as experts in our field, experts in our craft, the trusted advisors, and we're not leaving anything to chance. So yeah, my answer to that is absolutely. And it's probably an area, as you know, Troy, you get handed a lot of reserve forms and it says to be confirmed or blank. I think we need to get better at that as agents.
Yeah, I'm a big believer, especially before auction proceedings. I think the conversation definitely needs to happen at the reserve set, be that Thursday evening, where I encourage all my agents to kind of have that. It's not too close to the auction day. It's not too far away either. You get a really good understanding. You've normally done your final midweek inspection, and you've done that last round of calls to make sure that those buyers that have requested contracts, requested the building and pest report, have gone through and made their recommendations by their solicitors or acting parties from a legal point of view. They're all in line. I think it frames the registration process as well. And I know we're going to get into that in a second, but by framing the registration process with the buyers, you can start to preempt where the auctioneer will be asking for an opening bid or offer. And then if it does have a little bit of silence around it, you can move straight to that vendor bid. Now, Adrian, the funny thing about a vendor bid is there should be no fear around it. If you've been guiding a campaign quite clearly, you've been using market feedback, providing that to the owner, you've been seeing the recent sales that have happened during the course of the campaign. Most of the time, I would say, listen, 90% of my time, if I can't encourage a bid to commence on the auction floor, the vendor bid is normally at the guide price to commence. And that's the caliber of agents I work with. The caliber of agents I work with are that transparent with their pricing based on the information they have and those recent sales, that they can easily go, well, let's show full transparency. We've been quoting X. We're going to commence bidding from X, that same price. And I find that really has value. I find that most buyers appreciate that transparency, but I've also got really good relationships with the agents I work with to provide that feedback to the crowd that's watching. To make sure that they understand that's the way the business and the agents that I work with like to work as well, in that very transparent environment. I know from an integrity point of view, that's a really big part of your, I guess, ammunition, or not ammunition, the way your mantra, the way that you work out there in the field, is that you like to provide that transparency, but you're also there to help in a friendly environment, those buyers that want to purchase. Now, occasionally you get the buyer that just doesn't want to purchase, right? No matter what price it is, if it's $1, if it's 500,000, if it's $1 million, they're just not going to buy. They're just registering for the sake of registering. Those people exist. But I know from my experience of working so closely with you over the years is that that's something that's really important to you as well, having integrity in the way that you portray the vendor bid, but also commence auction proceedings on the floor.
100%, Troy. And tell me, Troy, have you had agents that have said to you, oh, look, we really don't want to use the vendor bid because we don't want to portray to the buyers that there's no interest or limited interest. Have you had agents say that to you?
Yes and no. I'm quite lucky, Adrian, in New South Wales, where I do about 95% of my auctions. We have to register. So everyone has to hold a bidding card. The McGrath bidding cards or the McGrath paddles that are available, they're pretty easy to see. So I can normally, even if it's just one or two of those buyers, I can normally say, there's multiple parties here. So there is a level of interest. I'd much rather have a result than no bid. In many circumstances, I don't think that does benefit to anyone really in this current. At a point in time, don't get me wrong. At a point in time, in no bid auction does have some benefit, but in most cases, placing a vendor bid and passing the property in and treating with those parties upward is by far a great baseline to work on, as opposed to no bid and then ambiguity around that bidding process and negotiation process. The great thing is, we're still seeing transactions happen for auction campaigns, in the high 80-90% range for our business in regards to the process. So selling prior, at or after auction within a set period of time, we're still seeing that process work effectively well. So buyers are committing to the process. They know that they're there to buy, more so than what we're seeing for the other side, which is private sale or private treaty conditions. How about you?
And I have had agents that have said, look, I really prefer not to use the vendor bid because I want to sort of protect the owner's price, and I want to make sure that the buyers that are here think that there's interest. And I think that's just a story that they're telling themselves. So I'll usually challenge them on that, and I'll say, look, the vendor bid is just, it is there to actually protect the vendor's price. Why? You're quoting 1.5. That's your price guide. The owner won't listen to any offers under that. So where's the downside in exercising the vendor's right to bid at 1.5? Therefore, you're drawing a line in the sand. You are protecting the vendor's price. And even if the buyers that are there think there's limited interest, why is that a bad thing? Like, at the end of the day, if a buyer wants to buy and a seller wants to sell, you're going to put the deal together. So I've also had some agents say, can we pass it in no bid? And I'm thinking, well, I don't see the upside in that either. Like, I'd much rather declare a vendor bid. Are you the same, Troy, with that?
Yeah, Adrian, I really think the only times I've ever come across that, I've normally dug a little bit deeper and realised that there was a point in time where a negotiation went south with a buyer prior to auction. That's probably there, or the work hasn't been as we would anticipate it to be with the owners in the process. So first open for inspection, VIP buyers going through. After the first open for inspection, when was the feedback provided? I think complacency can kind of get you to that point where you get nervous about that certain situation. But, I never see, the auction is an event, but it's not an event in the process of selling. It's actually a process that's followed for the execution of a sale, not an event as it is. Like, you're not going to an auction cross thinking that you're going to have mysterious buyers turn up, see it for the first time, bid and buy. Yes, it has happened to me probably in the past 10 years, 5 times maximum. But I really think, we should know exactly what's going to happen before it happens, with a couple of surprises along the way on the auction floor. And I think vendor bid's very important in that process.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I've been asked a lot, Troy, and this is a good segue for it because we're still talking auctions and we're potentially still talking vendor bid, is if there's one registered bidder, how do you know when to either still conduct the theatre of an auction and exercise the vendor bid, or pull aside the agent and the registered bidder and say, just want to be out of full transparency to let you know you're the only registered bidder. Here's the reserve price. I just want to let you know if we do negotiate, it will be under auction conditions and it will be unconditional. Let's enter into a negotiation. How do you know? Is it based on the demographic of the client? Is the vendor's instructions? Is it the agent's gut feel? Is it your instinct on the day and therefore making that recommendation? Because we do have that, either of those choices, right, with one registered bidder.
Yeah. first of all, I lead with dealing with integrity and honesty. So I always,
Yep.
the worst case scenario you could probably have is a buyer that's holding your bidders card, especially in the markets that we do have to register and hold bidding cards.
Yep.
Go through that process and then look around and see there's no one else in the auction.
Yes.
And opening bidder up, they'll be like, well, what are you guys trying to play at?
Yes.
It normally happens as a conversation to say, listen, this is the reality. You are in a position that you are the only registered party. Circumstances, right? You may have 3 or 4 parties that have dropped off because of the financial situation at the moment, because they haven't been able to get approval. Maybe because they've got an extended settlement on their property that maybe transacted last weekend. There's a whole huge amount of circumstances at the moment. So you need to have the conversation, but you need to have the conversation not on the auction floor or not 3 minutes before the auction, because you surprise someone, you scare them in this market. You want to be having really clear, consistent dialogue throughout the course of the campaign. Now that works again on both sides, from the vendor's point of view, but also the buyer's point of view. So when you get to auction day, you can say, listen, there's a couple of scenarios that may happen in the week leading up. With the vendor, we may have 1 register, we may have 5 registered, we may have 2 registered. You will know your numbers based on the work that you're doing, the callbacks, the inquiries, the second inspections, the requests and changes for contracts, those types of things. From the buyer's point of view, you kind of play that same scenario. We may have you as the only registered party. There's a couple of other people that have said they're interested and they have requested contracts and they have made changes based on their legal recommendations or requirements that they need. But they're also not as strong as your position right now. So they've said they're interested at the price ranges that we have been quoting, the recent sales that indicate this property is great value. But we don't necessarily know whether they're going to be in your position come auction day. Now, the great news is that you may be only competing against the owner come auction day, as opposed to competing against other parties. Now, me as a buyer, most times I'd rather negotiate with the owner and compete with the owner as opposed to compete with other parties. It's a known quantity because you set a reserve letter. Other buyers, you don't know what they're prepared to go to. So I actually think it's a really good thing in a lot of circumstances, but you must run the process and be really clear and consistent with your communication leading up to the auction, not 3 minutes before if they're the only registered party. From there, Adrian, the negotiation, the way that I like to run is, again, in a very transparent auction environment, to have the conversation. If we can formally agree on a price prior to auction, I still run the auction process and go through the particulars so we know that it's an unconditional contract. So there's no question of a doubt in regards to their buying circumstances. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're having the conversation with the owner as well. So sometimes it can be a vendor bid, with that vendor bid having the buyer coming over the top, you confirming the price and successfully doing it. Sometimes you can go through the formal process, agree on the price that both parties agree to, and then call for the bid, and they place the bid formally with their bidder's card shown, and then you sell the property. So there's a couple of different ways of doing it, but the first thing that everyone must remember is integrity, transparency, communication. Those 3 factors, if you get them right and you follow the system that we have in place, which is our legal system, to make sure it's done correctly, you're going to be in a really good state and really good position to get a result on auction day.
Yeah, nailed it, Troy. I think, integrity, transparency, communication is key. So, some of my owners, if I sit down with them at the reserve meeting and say, look, with 1 registered party, these are our options. I've had many just say, look, I've paid for an auction. I'd love to see an auction play out. And there's 1 buyer, that's fine. And can you explain to me how we utilize the vendor bid? And I'm like, well, this is probably the most important time to use the vendor bid, in order to create a benchmark and a platform on price, hopefully encourage the 1 registered party to bid north of that, and then enter negotiations and try and get it sold, under auction conditions. Or the second option is to have that direct conversation and do almost like a closed auction, if you like, and be fully transparent around them being the only registered party. So I don't think there's, it was sort of almost like a rhetorical question when I asked you. I don't think there's any set objectives or metrics to make a decision on that. I think it's all about, have you communicated with your vendor prior? And if so, what instructions have they given you? So let's not delude ourselves that that the decision is only upon us. We must consult our client. But then also with the buyer, have you actually sat down with the buyer prior and you looked at that as a potential scenario and preempted it and discussed it with them. And really, there shouldn't be any surprise factor if it gets to that. I just think that, in this market, Troy, over communication with buyers will set you free. I think the last 2 years, you could get away with limited communication with buyers and still sell real estate and still coming out looking quite strong. I just feel at the moment is, 50% of our time needs to be working with buyers, which is at parity in terms of what contribution a buyer makes to a transaction, which is 50%, where in the past, I think it's probably been 90% on listings, 10% on buyers. And that might have served its purpose in an abnormal market. We're sort of entering more into a normal market condition now. So, yeah, I think this has been a great discussion on auctions. And I mean, it started with vendor bid, but I know it's taken a few U-turns around other dialogue. But I think what's consistent and certainly something that you and I both agree on is communicate with your vendor, let them know about every possible scenario, leave nothing to chance, then replicate that conversation with your buyers. Make sure that these conversations are face-to-face, because that's how you're going to get your trust and rapport and your trusted advisor type of gravitas that's happening with those particular clients, and make sure that everything is planned out. I mean, an auction performance or an auction day is a very strategic process, yet why are we leaving vendor bid till the last minute? Why are we leaving deciding the reserve to the last minute? Why are we leaving potential scenarios left to the last minute? It really needs to be a very seamless transaction, a very comfortable and easy transaction for all stakeholders of it, including the underbidders, the buyer, the seller, the agent and the auctioneer and the observers, because they are still stakeholders in it. And then the community as well, who's looking at us for clarity in this what can be a confusing market, and they really want us to shine the light and say, hey, we are the agents to use and to talk to and to consult with in order to buy and sell real estate. Yeah,
absolutely. So there you go, listeners. Episode number 150. Know your client, both buyer and seller. Know the market. Know what's happening in the market. Know the way that they want to purchase. Know the way that they want to work. And then really understand that over communication in this market right now, which is pretty normal, Adrian, in most circumstances, the high caliber agents that I talk to, they're like, yeah, listen, the last couple of years was a bit obscure and it was really big. This is more of a normal market. Yep. So know that what you do today in the lead up to your auctions, in the lead up to that business, will be successful for you come auction day or the event of extracting a premium offer and negotiating with the client to get a great result. But AB, that was it's always one that comes up. I must admit, every question that I get around auctions is normally based around, expectations meeting. So how important is that right at the start of the campaign? Translating that through to when to use the vendor bid, and how to use it. So really important topic. Hopefully everyone got something from that. We're really glad that we did this episode. I know that you've been going out and doing other episodes. Can't believe you're doing that to me, but this is a good one.
It seems that podcast fidelity is not my strength, Troy. I'm sorry about that.
You're excused.
Thank you. All good. Thank you. We might need to go. We might need to go to couples therapy just to work through that blockage. Work through that blockage. Yeah.
After 25 years, I think you're stuck with me.
That's why I always post that two emojis, the two boys holding hands. That's us. That's us. All right, mate. Take care. Hey, listeners, I hope you got something out of Troy and I just having a conversation, which we would have had anyway, even if you weren't listening. But hope that's been of interest to everyone. And we look forward to episode 151. And we're going to answer some questions because they're backing up, Troy. I've got quite a few there on my DM. So we're going to start really smashing those, okay?
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks so much. See you next week.
See you, listeners. Thanks, Troy.